All right, so first of all, before we officially start, you okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Good.
Let's just sit for a moment with our eyes closed.
Okay.
Go into our breathing and our pulse rate. And then open your eyes and take a moment to make the transition from being inside to outside. Can you stay with your breathing and your heart rate as we do this now? So coming and going is part of my game. So
Good. First of all, how you feeling?
I feel really good. I feel really up for this and intrigued. I've left a lot of emptiness in preparation, so I feel well engaged to start.
Why do you think we're doing this?
Why?
Hmm?
Well, I'm doing it because I feel like a lot of my life that has passed here in the last 48 years has been unrecorded because I'm not a writer. And I have certain unique philosophical and personal and community relationships of almost 50 years that are, you know, probably in a sense, I'm looking back at my life in a sense of like, my God, what a rich and wonderful life I've had. And my early life was to be an artist, a painter. I thought that I studied art for most of my life, and as a child was only able to create art, but I couldn't do linear mathematics or grammatics were just escaping me. But, so in any case, when my earliest studies led to being here, my earliest studies being art and the nature of interesting form and the graphics of that. And so when I came here, I came to Esalen after many, many years of preparation to be ready for, I think, the kind of body-mind teachings that were here. And we can go into that in our account.
And let's wait for a moment on that. One last question, and then I'm going to ask you a more straight-up shot. So let's say this is many years from now. And there are people watching this who maybe never knew you.
Right.
And you and I are no longer around.
Right.
What are you hoping they feel or think or sense as they experience you?
Well, I feel like they're watching Toulouse-Lautrec or Van Gogh. They're seeing someone who is a very, very embedded person in their time and on a leading edge of our culture's perception of what is possible as a human being.
Good. All right, so I'm going to start out Esalen style and ask you a very straight up, simple question. And the question is, who are you?
Shall I answer with what we put out?
Sure.
Okay. So, I'm Esalen's resident alien. A secular skeptic in a utopian community. I'm a devotee of surrealism, irony, and the fractured nature of identity. I'm also the last remaining member of the team of Esalen therapists who revolutionized psychotherapy in the 1960s. So when I look back upon my life, like the ambitions I had as a child to where I am now finishing the last third of my life, I feel I've accomplished what I really wanted to do. As a child, I was very interested in biology and the nature of identity. I grew up surrounded by Christian, messianic, fundamentalist Christians.
You grew up in Nebraska?
No, in Washington State.
Okay.
A little town called Opportunity, Washington, on the border of Idaho, northern Idaho. And I was wanting to make a point there when you asked that question. What was it that I was talking about? I can't remember.
That's okay.
Anyway, I know what it was that growing up surrounded by different forms of identity, different ways of life, I was very early and at a very young age beginning to be interested in identity and what is a personality. Also, as a young child, what is it to be a personality? As I said, I was very poor in school, in the linear types of teaching, but I was very gifted in terms of reading. I was very good at reading, could read a lot of information, and I was good at art. So I concentrated on that. I later found out I was dyslexic and have really right-left reversals. So that by the time I came to Esalen, I had a whole history of studying identity, being interested in psychology, being interested in the lives of artists, and being interested in what was presented here at Esalen, which was Fritz Perls' teaching, very much was a reiteration of the values and the themes of art, the study of art and how to create art. So I just immediately felt I could dive into the learnings here, and it was just the water I wanted to swim in. I came here at 24, 25.
How old are you now?
73. So when I'm looking back, my earliest questions were, I remember where I got lost, is my earliest questions as a child is, what is life? I was studying insects, I was watching nature a lot, also watching and looking at what are people about, and not having much success with people, but being totally entranced with nature and insects. And at an early age, I started reading natural history accounts of nature, of animal life, of bug life, and so on. And so at the end of my life, at 73, my earliest questions were, what is life? What is personal identity? What are people made up of? Because I'm confused by all these different ways of life. That led me to psychology. Well, it led me first to anthropology, and then psychological anthropology. And so at the end of my life, these questions of what is identity, I feel I know. What is life? I feel I know by studying Darwin's writings, by reading the evolutionary accounts of what makes up life, the biological basic theories. I've taught myself to answer these life questions that I've had all my life. And now at the end of my life, I can say, well, I can pretty much give a good account of what makes up an identity and how we're motivated as an identity, how we activate ourselves. And the theories I work with as a therapist are fleshed out by a lifelong study of these matters. And I probably read 2,000 to 3,000 books in my lifetime. Deep books, not literature and science.
Great. Mind if I ask you a few questions?
Sure.
All right, so let's be a little bit dingy for a second. If there were to be one word that the people here at Esalen would use to describe you, and I understand nailing anything down into one word is a fool's game anyhow, but if there were one word, what do you think that word would be that other people would say about Seymour is a
provocateur.
And if I were to ask you the same question, what would be the one word you'd label onto yourself?
I would say, yeah, provocateur.
So what is a provocateur's job?
Well, I'm like a gadfly. I'm like someone who's sees beyond the conventional and is someone who is willing to challenge convention and local knowledge. Like I'm a great provocateur around local knowledge or common consent or what it is that is the latest ruling scientific theory or philosophical kind of game that's being promoted in the world at large and at Esalen.
So here you are in a counterculture,
right,
in which you're counter to the culture, which is countercultural to begin with.
Right.
And a culture where you've got nothing but individualists, where you think of yourself as the resident alien.
Right.
Is that natural, or do you have to kind of work at being that kind of provocateur?
No, I've always been this way. At first in my life I was very introverted and embedded myself in my own life, psychological life, by retreating into the woods and playing in the woods by myself.
Did you have a different name as a young man?
Oh yeah, I changed my name in 20 years.
So this was 50-something years ago when people weren't quite changing their names.
Yeah.
You crafted a new name for yourself, Seymour.
Right.
And that meant to you,
well
why'd you pick that name versus Harvey or Dan or...
I'll come into this that my grandmother was part Native American, and part of my early life was around Native Americans and their psychological constructs of how an identity is formed. Mm-hmm. And one of them was that Indian culture, one takes a new name in life phases. Like at 14 you have a different name than you had as a child. So I was in art school, and my name is Gary Soames. My mother named me after Gary Cooper.
Really?
And I hated that name all my life. You didn't know that. So I hated that name, and anyway, one day I was signing one of my paintings, Gary. I said, that's not a fucking artist's name. So I was thinking of some names. I was reading the lives of artists, how they took a name that was different than their birth name, and I came up with Seymour.
Did it have any meaning for you at the time?
Oh yeah, it meant Seymour.
Really?
Yeah. It meant that this being that was putting this painting out there saw more than others.
And the Carter?
I don't know where it came from. I think it came from a detective television program. There was some Carter detective show, I think, and I liked the way it euphonously went with Seymour Carter.
Do you have another name now? Do you have an Indian name at this point in your life?
Yeah.
What would that be?
My name, my last third of my life, I went on a vision quest about 6 years ago.
Tell me what a vision quest is for you. Do you meditate? Do you hike? Do you...
Well, what I was faced with was growing out of the sense of being Seymour Carter and what that was about. And as a child, I played a lot of Indian. I played Indian most of my childhood. That was an identity I felt was great. So I embedded in myself Indian psychology, these vision quest ideas, which are that at a period of life where you feel like you are a new identity, you need to go into the woods and do some kind of be by yourself and put yourself through an ordeal and come up with a new name that fits you.
And does somebody hand it to you? Does somebody come down in a spirit guide, or does it pops into your own mind?
Well, being a rationalist, a poetic rationalist, I assumed it was my responsibility.
And what is the new name?
Oho Pohoki.
Oho Pohoki, which means?
The eye. Oho means the eye in the Spanish dialect where I was doing my vision quest. And Pohoki is the name of a casino. So the name means the eye of the casino, which I feel I am here. My role at Esalen has been kind of to be the eye of the casino here, of who's a liar, who's a fraud, who's like cheating and so on. In the magnificence of Esalen's truth-telling groups, one of my roles has been the proponent of unmasking what seems to be a pretense. And this is...
Say more about that. Unmasking pretense.
Well, from Fritz Perls to Will Schutz, the dynamic of psychotherapy has a lot to do with challenging one's, let's say, character defenses, one's pretending rather than being authentic. So my whole studies, my whole interest in psychotherapy and psychology has been under pioneers whose leading theories have to do with authenticity, with the authenticity of the self. Carl Rogers to Tillich to all of these people, Fritz Perls, Will Schutz, tell the truth. And my role at Esalen has been a lot about how to keep these traditions of truth-telling going on in the group, which often says to, in the early days we were kind of rude and brusque about confronting people about their inauthenticities, their masks, and now we're much more kind and gentle, but the same dynamic applies, is that we feel the person really can't fulfill their life unless they're giving up a lot of their pretense.
So for you, Eye of the Casino, when you first mentioned it, I thought to myself, Eye of a Storm, which is a very interesting place to be in a storm, because a storm is very turbulent, but the eye is still. But that's not exactly the way it's not the metaphor that you just commented on. It's more the eye, the seeing in a casino. So seeing the game and seeing who's playing the game fairly and who's pretending or who's got deceit going on. You feel like that's your position. That's your dance.
Right. Yeah. So maybe this is a point to tell a story.
Yeah.
So I'll tell the story of how I got the name, how I made myself the name. So maybe maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, I was coming to a place in myself and feeling like it was time to do another vision quest and to find a new name for myself. And so I began researching places, and I landed on Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I want to introduce here a little bit about my background, my family background that leads me to do what I would say and live a kind of Indian psychology. In that my mother's mother was a French Indian woman who was kidnapped from her tribe when she was 6 years old or so and taken 1,000 miles away to Oklahoma territory and put in Christian schools. So part of my quest in life is to be I'm only 1/16 Indian, but I identify mostly with that part of myself. I don't identify with the Christian culture very much. Being surrounded by Christian missionaries as a child, I got tired of that. So in going into a vision quest, I'm doing something that I've done before and something that's quite established for me. So I flew to Santa Fe where I had a friend, rented a car, drove around the territory maybe 2,000 or 3,000 miles, and then landed in Bandelier National Park, which is one of the places where the Pueblo Indians still have, or the remains of a Pueblo village is there. And it's in a plateau, a kind of desert, high mountain desert of the Southwest. And it was perfect for me. Here are remains of an Indian culture that I could be imbued with. I was prepared to do the hike. I made a couple of journeys there to see what the territory was like, and walked maybe 5 miles into the Badlands, and it was below Los Alamos. Los Alamos is visible at night from where I was. So the conditions are good. I go into the park to get this permission to go into the park, and here surrounding me, I had brought along a pack with me and a Walkman with African warrior music. So I had a headset on and I was listening to African warrior.
You were totally by yourself.
Totally by myself. And I walk with sticks at that time too. And as I'm checking into the park, I'm telling you this because later it's part of the story, is that a group of woolly lesbians were getting ready to check into the park too. And they were showing me the greatest scorn. I'm like, here are these burly lesbians, about 6 or 8 of them going into the park. And I'm a male, and they show all their hatred towards a male they can. You know, they're really spreading bad vibes on me. And they're all stocky, and they have woolly sweaters on. So I call them woolly lesbians. So I take off on my trip, and
So you got your walking sticks and your headset.
I got my walking sticks, I got my headset, I've got food for 3 days, I've got water for the next creek, which was like 8 hours away. And so I also had brought along a little cooker and my cappuccino maker, an espresso maker, and I had a foam beater that I could beat water in milk powder into a foam. That was a critical ingredient on the trip, was to be able to have my espresso, my cappuccino, during the trip. So I took 36 hours in this loop from Bandelier to the Rio Grande and then back up into Bandelier again. So I go along and I get maybe 5 miles into the hike, and I'm stopped off the trail, and I'm cooking a cappuccino, and I'm back off the trail, and I notice that the woolly lesbians are going by, and they pass me on the trail. Go a little further. So I think that's great, and then I take up, and on the map there is like a 500 feet drop, then walk across a valley, then 500 feet up, and then walk 6 miles and 500. The landscape was broken like that, and so part of the trip was to be absolutely in tune with what I'm doing, because I'm all there all alone. If anything happened to me, I'm dead. You know, I couldn't break my leg, I couldn't fall and be without any kind of, there was no aid. So I'm very careful. I'm being very careful the whole time. I walk with sticks, and I've got my headset going with the bandolier, or with the Zulu warrior music. I brought a little herb along. I'm smoking, so during this trip, I'm stopping every 2 or 3 hours to drink some coffee and do a little herb, and to get into the rhythm of putting myself into a kind of a trance, which I felt I needed to do. And this pitching myself into an ordeal also throws me into a kind of a psychological state of being, where I'm very, very focused on myself, and I'm also focused on the dangers, and can I do this? All of this stuff. So I get to the top of a rim, and I'm making my cappuccino, and I realize, oh my God, I'd left a bottle of water on this last encampment. I'd forgotten to put another bottle of water. And all now I have is, all I have for the next 8 to 10 hours is this much water. And I think, holy shit, what am I going to do now? And I'm sitting there pondering this, and I'm on the edge of a cliff escarpment where I had to go down 1,000 feet, across about a quarter of a mile, and then up another 800 feet. And as I'm sitting there, this cliff was covered with petroglyphs, just really, really like you love, Danny, all these petroglyphs. I'm stunned. I've never seen many petroglyphs in one place. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, what am I going to do? And suddenly I see this guy jump on a rock and then jump down like an ape. You know, what the fuck is this? And it turns out it's a guy who's leading outback journey for drug addicts. He's got them out there camping in the mountains, and they're going on vision quests themselves. And he then gives me some water. Great, I got some water. So then I continued on the journey, and I got to this, and I had enough water, and I'm going along, and I'm chanting to myself, what name's coming to me? What name's coming to me? And one of the names of a hot springs in the area was Oho Hot Springs. That's a cool name. I like Oho. It's like the Dadaist in me likes it's frontwards and backwards the same, Oho. And it also means sea. It means sight. So it's a continuation of Seymour. And it also means in this dialect, watch out. So I'm going through all these name considerations. I'm clearly in a trance by now after about 8-10 hours into it. And Oho keeps coming into it. Oho, Oho, Oho. It's a good name. I could chant it with my Indian stuff and so on. So then I come down the last escarpment. It's about night, and I'm making it to, what was the name of this creek? Frijoles Creek. Frijoles Creek that ran into the Rio Grande. And there's this campground. You have to be in campgrounds. So as I'm coming into the campground, it's about 7 o'clock at night, and it's after dinner, and I come upon these woolly lesbians, and they're finished with dinner, and they're freaked out because they can't throw a string attached to a rock over a tree to draw their food up because there are bears there, and in order every night you had to put your food up in a tree. Well, all of these very masculine lesbians, none of them could throw, and they see me, a man coming down the path. They turn from freeze out to, oh, you're a man, wonderful. Would you like to have something to eat? Have some coffee or something like this? So I say, sure, I'll throw it over the limb, and it took me like 10 tries to throw it over the limb, but I threw it over the limb, drew the thing up, and they were very happy about that. And then I went down a little further to make my own encampment. So I get everything set up, lay down, and for the next 6 hours, all I could hear were bear in the thickets. I couldn't go to sleep. I was scared shitless and so on. And it was like, oh my God, this is terrible. I can't sleep and so on. So I got up the next morning, and I made my coffee, and I made my way to a painted cave there. It was a really old, ancient place. And I there kind of did my rituals of what I don't believe in a deity, but I did my prayers kind of things. And then I walked down to the Rio Grande, and I was out of water, and I waded into the Rio Grande to get water, and I had some pills to put my water in. And then I also had lost some of these pills. So there I was in a high-temperate desert in really serious conditions about water. I only had enough water. I had like a 10-hour climb back to the Bandelier Park headquarters. And so I took this water and put the salt pills in it, took it in my canister, and looked at the map. I'm an old outdoors person, so I'm pretty safe and careful outdoors. So as it's becoming dark, I'm having to, oh yeah, that's it. I had to get back in the dark because I had a headlamp so I could see in the dark. But because I didn't have any water, I had to march in the dark. So as I'm doing this, like it's a 10-hour march, I'm going up into a plateau, and a goddamn snowstorm started. and I started to get hypothermic, and I'm shivering, and I'm exhausted. I've been going without sleep for like 30 hours or something like that, and so when I tried to rest, I would quiver and shake, and I couldn't do it. My body temperature would drop too much. So I kept going. I was stumbling, and I see the lights of Los Alamos in the night. I said, okay, I'm going to get through this. You're my enemy. Los Alamos, the autumn industry, the whole thing of the sickness of our culture is expressed in this. And this then gives meaning to my walk. And then I start to march and try to save my life, struggling against the lights of Los Alamos and the presence of Los Alamos. And I just did that. I went through the night, about 10 hours, 8 to 10 hours of just struggling. And finally, I got to where the escarpment was to go back down to Bandelier. And it's this 800-foot escarpment in the night. And every step is so careful. And I'm just shivering and shaking. And I got back down, got into my car, and turned the heat on, and I just shivered for about 2 hours, then got to a friend's place and got in the bathtub and put a lot of hot water on me. And then I thought, boy, that's the best vision quest I ever made. I mean, it really was the whole thing. It put my life on the line. And as I'm coming down, I'm trying to think, what goes with oh-ho? And I thought, well, as I did the survey of going into the Bandelier Park, I went to the Pohoki Indian Reservation Casino, and there in the casino I lost $100. So I thought, okay, Oho Pohoki, it's like Hokey Pohoki, I like that. Oho Pohoki, Pohoki. Oh yeah, that's my name, Oho Pohoki. So it comes together as the eye of the casino.
What, and have you remained friends with the woolly lesbians, or that was just for the rock throwing meal exchange?
That was it.
That was it.
All
right, so I'm gonna move you in a couple of directions here, if you're okay with that. One of the things that you are is you are a living part of Esalen. And my view, and I've got 40 years now, not as many as you, is that Esalen is sort of like a floral garden or a stew or a mosaic, and there's different ingredients.
Right.
And there's clearly a Seymour ingredient that's in the roots, that's in the soil, that's in the limbs, that's in the flowers. There's no question that there is a Seymour ingredient to Esalen. Now, when you think back, because your memory is quite crystalline, when you think back to, let's say, the late 60s, the early 70s, a time that many people were not here, maybe not even alive, what was Esalen back then? Well, how would you describe the way it looked, the way it felt, its people?
Well, I can say, and then I can bring in a Fritz story.
Sure.
Let's say in 1968, Esalen was the center of the cyclone of the Youth Rebellion. It was one of the center places where, like Mecca for the Islamics, Esalen was a pilgrimage center for hundreds and thousands of youth interested in some sense of transcendence, breakthrough, consciousness, LSD, the sexual revolution, encounter, being sensitive, finding your body, yoga. All of these things were first kind of filtered into the culture through Esalen. And by 1966 and 67 and 68, Esalen was making its mark as a world, making a world impact. And so at that time, many people came here who were looking for, well, Esalen had the golden elixir. There we are exploring with all kinds of psychotherapy, the world's most important and pioneer minds in psychotherapy came here and taught us, who were here. So we were like a convergence of cultural forces that never will again occur, very similar to the 1890s or the 1920s in Paris, where there's a cultural convergence of people, characters, and cultural themes, tropes, ways of being that all came together here and created this kind of incredible, what I call a three-ring circus. And the story I'm telling you, I'm going to tell you my most practiced story. And it's about Fritz Perls and the three-ring circus at Esalen, and how one day, right about where this house is right now, this room, one day in 1968, 2 helicopters landed on the field. This was just a field. And out of one of them came Ravi Shankar and the Maharishi. Now I, as another story, was part of a group of people who brought Ravi Shankar to San Francisco for a concert. And I recognized him. And the guy coming out of the helicopter behind him was the Maharishi. Now for you who don't know this, the Maharishi at the time was the Beatles guru and probably the most prominent and well-known guru at the time. And this was a time of quite a few gurus appearing like mushrooms after every rain. So I'm sitting there watching this, and the crew at Esalen was watching this, and out of the next helicopter comes Ringo Starr and George Harrison. And we thought, oh wow, this is fucking A. I mean, there's a lot of people coming to look at us and see what we're up to, but none of this stature. And of course, at that time, we're really cool, and we're trying to pretend that we've seen everything, and so we're, you know, acting very gracious and like, oh, we've seen it all. We've seen movie stars and so on. Jane Fonda was Dick Price's girlfriend in '66 and so on, or '62, '63. So in the meantime, we're totally excited and like, oh my God, the Beatles are here. Holy Christ, the Maharishi's here. And what could this mean? And then acting cool on the surface. The hip guys, the hip girls. So what happened is then Ravi Shankar and George Harrison went out on the lawn and started a sitar concert, and then gathered about 50 or 60 people around them, and this was an occasion that we're sitting around listening to sitar music, and it was really nice. Now, then as the music ends, there was a big rock at the end of the lawn then, and the Maharishi had planted himself on top of this rock, and they were all covered with flower leis. They had stacks up to their ears with flower leis, and they probably come from Hawaii or something like that. And the Maharishi was sitting on this rock with a rug under him, very beatific looking, and radiant, you know, this radiant nutcase that he looked like to me anyway. And his flowers all over him, flowers around him, and he's sitting up there. And as the music ends, he begins to lecture to us about love is everything. It's just the answer to all life is, you know, love everybody. And it was in a high-pitched, strange voice. He just seemed as awkward and as phony as anybody I'd seen at Esalen. We'd seen many, many pitchmen for this or that form of enlightenment at that time. So at that time, Fritz Perls was also about the most famous therapist in the world, and he at that time had a cameraman following him around Esalen who was making a documentary of Fritz Perls at Esalen. So about the time the Maharishi is full into his pitch and we're really attentive, we see Fritz Perls appear at the end of the deck with a cameraman behind him, and Fritz comes to the end of the deck and looks around and puffs his cigarette. He smoked constantly, claims he never inhaled. So Fritz could brook no rivalry at that time. Whoever showed up, he did something to make them look ridiculous and to make him stand out on top. He was top dog at Esalen at that time. He was clearly the king baboon. And every day he would come around, or every week, those of us who lived here knew that we're going to have Fritz Perls lay a fucking bomb on us and drop us into bed for 2 days of depression because it was so heavy and so right on. And I thought the guy was a sadist. I mean, at times he was just cruel, but they later turned out to be good insights. But so he's looking at this scene, and we know, oh my God, I'm sitting in the audience there, and oh, Fritz can't stand any competition, and clearly he's going to do something here. So at that time, he was one of the most famous therapists in the world, and you know what he was most famous for in a way was body language, reading body language. And I remember many of his interventions being very acute in what are you doing with your hands? And the person then is focused on their hands, and Fritz would say, what are you doing with your hands? Identify with your hands and express who you are. And often that would reveal that you're talking sweetly about your mother, but you've got a fist going here. That underlying this is something else. So this is important to the story. So Fritz comes down the stairs, walks around the crowd with the cameraman following, and pretty soon he's got the audience split like at a tennis match. And the audience is watching him, then they're watching, going back to Maharishi, then they're going to Fritz, and Fritz is over behind Maharishi, then he goes over here, and the Maharishi's pitch starts to fall apart. He starts getting more and more high-pitched voice, and he starts to stumble a little bit, but he had a canned speech, so it was like, you know, he could probably suffer through almost anything, but he was really squirming. And Fritz studied theater, and one of his great things was to take a group of people and completely provoke and dominate them by something he did. So what he did was, at one point when we're all divided and the Maharishi is sitting there freaking out and tearing flowers apart in his lap, Fritz said, look at that fool, talking about love and kindness. Meanwhile, he's tearing those flowers to pieces. The Maharishi startles, but he goes back to his pitch. All of us on the Esalen team say, "Ray for our side." That was so cool.
What does that? What does that tell? What does that reflect to you about that era or about Esalen then?
That we had the king baboon in our community, someone who was probably one of the world's great provocateurs and great minds. That we had Gregory Bates in here, we had Carl Rogers, we had Will and Fritz, we had all kinds of named people as well as non-named people who were incredibly gifted. I liken us to like the Bauhaus was to art and architecture in Germany in the 20s. We were like that to psychotherapy and new philosophies in the 60s.
Can I press in on this a little bit?
Yeah.
You want to just take one moment to pause. Danny, how you doing with tape and time and such? Why don't you bring me into frame just for a second? All right, so Seymour, I'm going to ask you a general question, but also a personal question. Okay? We'll return to the psychotherapy and the uncovering human pretense in a moment. But the late 60s and the 70s was also a very peculiar window of time because for a brief moment in history, only a brief moment in history, people felt liberated from fears of sexual disease. People felt a desire to know their bodies, to experience pleasure, to connect in ways that humans had always been worried about or unwilling to or unable to interact. So it was a time of sexual appetites and sexual expression. And quite a lot of that took place in California, and a vortex of that was here, or so people think.
Right.
When you think back to that era, here's my two questions. What was the sexual vibe back then? And then two, you were considered, you know, the raven-haired, fire-eating, dancing, sexually vibrant, charismatic character.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine you had your fair, your game was on.
Yeah.
So two questions. What was the sexual scene then, honestly? And what was it like to be in it?
Well, that's a good question. I could tell a story afterwards, but
Yeah,
first
hold the
let's
story
say-
for a minute. Yeah, give me.
So, it was like, as you say, it was a time when sexual boundaries, sexual limits were relaxed, and it was, Esalen was kind of a breakthrough place. And those of us who were part of the resident community at that time were able to explore in ways that no one has since. And it's deplorable to me to have had that freedom to explore my sexuality and to learn about the culture of sex now, how constrained it is, how limited people are by very few partners and so on. So it was a time of explosion. I mean, literally you could walk on the property and in the next moment you're down on the edge of the cliff having sex within 15 minutes. That's happened to me a couple of times. I lived in the massage room, North Massage Room. The baths were open sex, lots of sex. But I was...
Was it out in the open, or was it always visibly anyhow to the side?
No, I mean, there were orgies in the baths out in the open, but that's another story. But like the question you're asking, yeah, I mean, that's part of this. There were orgies, there were group things, there were lots of exploration of our bodies and our emotions.
Was it exploitive in your mind? Was it someone taking advantage of someone else?
No, no. That's what I want to get to, is that although the freedoms were there, we were doing psychotherapy with each other all the time. We were in engagements of group dynamics, maybe 20 hours a week. We were engaged with how are we doing our life, what are the ethics of this, what are you learning about sensitivity and compassion. So the sexual explorations that happened here at Esalen were quickly turned to an examined sexuality, and we also learned that we were terrible lovers. I mean, we had lots of sex, but really we weren't
So
sensitive.
speak for yourself, and let's
Yeah.
focus on you, because you were, I mean, you were in your glory in many ways, a young, vibrant
Right.
guy with a willingness to try things. What did you find out about your own sexuality during that free love era?
Okay. Well, I can focus on me, but it's true of all of us that
Fair enough.
that I and others, we turned to massage to learn about touching, to learn how to touch someone, because our sexuality really was the normal 100-yard dash to orgasm that was common for males in our culture, which left the women frustrated. So in our encounter groups, telling the truth about our lives, this came as feedback. So, well, you're a terrible lover, you know, you left me hanging and you were satisfied. And so that became the Esalen questioning, truth-telling groups, the encounter groups had a lot to do with examining where you failed to measure up or meet the other person humanly. And this was Fritz's work, this is Will's work, this is a lot of people's work at that time. So the sexuality at Esalen, in the inner circles, turned more towards this is a basis for exploration, but because we're sleeping with Madam X and Madam Y, and they're in the group, we were honor-bound to tell what was going on, and that led to all kinds of rivalries and all kinds of issues about sexuality and all kinds of emotions about it, so that the sexuality became part and parcel of that. After a while of sleeping around, everyone was pairing up and finding a partner, and we were finding good partners. And that's been my career too. I mean, at times I've had the wonderful, let's say, I call it sport fucking, times of that, but I really wanted the deep intimacy relationship of sexuality and the partnership deepening. And we did that in that time. I think that we all participated. You came in the last part of that, Danny, but that we all participated on how to make a relationship work. That was our focus. Now, let me go to one more thing. Also, what came about was the study of the body. And we were then introduced to both Fritz and the Reichian world of the organismic theories of Reich, which laid great emphasis at that time on having a whole body orgasm.
Right.
So that became a holy grail. Could we two together have a whole body orgasm together? And we practiced in these crackpot exercises at that time to do that. But I would say that our sexuality was in a way honored by the examination of who we are as people engaged in this. And it still goes on today. There's still polyamorous groups here at Esalen. There's still struggles about how do we remain monogamous or not. I think myself and others that experimented found that the greatest satisfaction came from a committed monogamous relationship. It didn't work to play around sexually.
So there was an ingredient to Esalen, still remains, but more so back then, of nudity.
Yeah.
Which in the outside world, people make jokes about volleyball games at nudist colonies, or they imagine everybody walks around with erections. But here Esalen had nudity.
Yeah.
There was nudity on the lawn. A lot of groups were done in the nude. The baths, of course, were clothing optional, but people generally didn't wear anything other than their point of view. So what was it like to be in a scene where nudity was common? And what was the if somebody were to ask them, what was the point of it?
Well, you're not going to... My answer is going to surprise you. My family were nudists. My mother's family, my grandfather was a blacksmith and then studied chiropractics. And at that time, in the 1900s, the turn of the century, the reform movement from Germany, nudity, sunbathing, things like that. My grandfather was a natural healer. And my grandmother, his wife, was French and Indian. So I grew up in a family of nudists, so it was completely normal for me to be...
But most of us, when we came down that driveway, I brought my mom and dad here to visit me, I think in 1972. My parents they're still alive now, but as straight can humanly be. They'd never been west of New Jersey. And we were sitting in the lodge, and it was a cloudy day, and then the sun came out, and all of a sudden everybody in the lawn just took all their clothes off.
Right.
Well, my mom and dad, to this day, whenever they can, tell that story, because to the average person, nudity is...
Yeah, absolutely.
So what, separate from that it was a common thing for you, what role did it play for people to step onto this property and get naked?
Well, for me, when I see people at the baths with a bathing suit, I feel how horrific. I mean, why is this allowed at Esalen? Why aren't they, confronting their bodies as themselves? Why are they taught that they should be ashamed about their genitals? For me, it's a sign of the cultural time shifting from an open era to a very restricted puritanical era, in a sense.
So for you, the nudity was about that issue of authenticity, owning your body, being who you are.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Did that jolt people, or was it comforting for people?
Well, I'm sure that there were people that were jolted, completely jolted. The heritage is that their body is something to be ashamed of, to show to other people. That is still a jolting thing to Mexican Americans or Arabic cultures. They don't do that. But for us here at Esalen, we were trying to form a kind of new Greek school of philosophy and athletic aesthetics and our body, that our body was something that we could not get away from. And the anti-sexual, anti-body traditions of the Western European culture, we were fighting against that. We were definitely a counterculture to this, and from both enjoying our bodies, many of us were former athletes, and we were like you, we were comfortable in our bodies, and we thought everyone else would be too if they would only relax, let themselves do some sensory awareness, get massaged and so on. Well, that worked for hundreds of thousands of people, but for thousands of people it didn't work. And now we're at a place where it's clothing optional. I suppose I could, accept that, but to me I still feel it ruins the Greek frieze I have in my mind. In Grecian times, people were nude. And I lived in a German culture, let me say also, where nudity is very, very common. In the 70s, I've been in Munich, Germany, in the main downtown park, where over 1,000 people are nude in the summer. And that lasted for about 4 or 5 summers in the 70s. But it's all passed away. Those kinds of things are, when one studies history, you realize, okay, there's a liberal era that's usually followed by a very restrictive, conservative era, and then there's a liberal era again, in looking at Western history.
So to your recollection, as I'm listening to you, and it's great to hear you describe an era that I remember similarly. It's interesting for me to listen to your descriptions and match them to mine, which no one has ever, we don't talk about these things very much. Very similar to your recollections. But your description of Esalen at the time as a place of freedom, of liberation, of experimentation, of life examined, communicating, sharing, touching, seems glorious. Is that the way you think of the early years of Esalen, as sort of there was glorious in all of those ways?
Well, I read history. So for me, one of the goals of my early life before I exposed myself to this was 13, 14, 15, reading about the Bohemian culture of Paris in the 1890s, when this breakthrough in modern art, expressionism, came about. And I feel that psychotherapy also is an expressive art, that we here created an expressive form of psychotherapy. Say your question again, I got lost. It
seems that Esalen was in its richest glory, as you described it during that era.
What I want to say is, yes, Esalen was the cresting wave of the time, at that time, and I feel that, like, in the 1890s in Paris and also in the 1920s in Paris, there was a cultural convergence that Esalen shared in as a place of, as I said, a convergence of all of these cultural themes: consciousness, psychotherapy, authenticity, sexuality, a buoyant lifestyle. What is it to live a life that is about enjoyment rather than suffering? The mixture of the Asian traditions of yoga, of meditation, all get mixed in here. And so I feel like, yeah, we founded and showed the potential, and even became known as the Human Potential Group. We showed the potential of what's there in us, in our potential, if we wanted to explore it.
So would you say over these last 50 years that Esalen has ascended or descended from that point?
There's no way we can be the three-ring circus we were then. We were the center of the culture's focus. We're not the center of the culture's focus anymore. I still get a thrill walking into the dining room and hearing the buzz. And the buzz of the dining room, to me, the criteria of Esalen is working. If I go in that dining room and I'm afraid to go in that dining room, and I'm excited to go in that dining room, and I go in the dining room and there's this buzz at every table, that there are conversations going on that are like rich and deep between this two people. I look over there, there's three people deep in a conversation. For me, that's the essence of Esalen, and it still continues.
Let me ask
in
you,
terms of...
stay with me just one second. I know you got a thought. Can I stay with it?
Sure.
You paint a picture, and I can see it, of Esalen being not simply one thing, but the convergence of many things, and also at an unusual moment in history.
Right.
But if I were to ask you, what is the essence of that Esalen? What, that if somebody took it away, it wouldn't be Esalen anymore. What is that?
I think it's this, that people are in deep communication with each other, in dyads or triads or in groups, that they're telling the truth to each other. I feel touched saying this. I mean, it's really, as long as truth is being told, as long as people feel free to do that one-on-one, the group dynamic is a bit artificial, but one-on-one, the depth of communication that is possible, what we teach here, I think has gone deep into the culture. And I look at Esalen as a 500-year project, not a 50-year project.
I'm a little surprised. I'm delighted and surprised by this answer. Delighted, but also surprised. I would have thought you might have said, without the free sexuality, without the wild center of cultural attention, without the movie stars coming in, Esalen has lost its glow. But you feel that those things are not the real essence of what matters for the long haul.
Right.
Why am I surprised that? Why did I think you would say more that Esalen has been on the decline?
Well, I have some opinions about the management of Esalen and the problems that we have from coming from 100 members to now 300 and losing this kind of close interaction that face-to-face interaction brings. And
Let's hold off on the management discussion, which we will get to.
Okay, well,
but in your mind, the essence of Esalen is the environment in which people can
tell the truth
and connect.
Yeah, and connect.
And you still feel that?
Yeah, very much. I mean, it's very much there, I'm sure. And it's like we had all of these dramatic types of interaction, the group dynamics, take off your clothes in 15 minutes, you know, lie on the floor and fight with your rival in the group. All of these things were necessary, perhaps, in breaking free of all these things. But what we really have come to, in a sense, is we're able to listen to people whisper. We're able to listen to their whispers. And we've tuned ourselves to be very conscious that they're saying this, but underneath this, what are they saying? What do they want to tell me? And this kind of sense, let's say, of the horse whisperer coming to the community of Esalen and being taught in all these different ways that we have of what is it this person is really whispering and not able to say with full volume. Can we bring that out? Can we show them that there's a way that they can speak their whispers and speak them with full volume and full heart? That's what I think is really what's the essence of Esalen. We might make a pause here for...
I'm thinking I'd like to take a pause.
Fine. I mean, I'm needing a break in 5-10 minutes.
Okay, let me ask you one more question, we'll take a break.
Sure.
Okay, so here's the question that people don't ask of the old timers. We love to tell the stories, you love to tell the stories of the good old times, the funny stories, the sexual escapades, the breakthrough groups. But was there a dark side to that era? Was there not good stuff taking place inside of people and on this property?
Oh,
Would you reflect on the dark side of that so-called great era?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that touches me too, because in diving into these realms with acid, with psychotherapy, with the opinion that if you tell the truth, nothing but the truth, everything will come out all right. And I think we were like the French revolutionaries, that we were too insistent on the truth. And bringing the truth to certain people too early cracked them. We had several suicides. 2 or 3 very close people to me committed suicide, and I think from that era of the confrontations, the examination that we were forcing on people they weren't ready for it. And I feel that yes, we had many, many failures in that sense, that we did not get away without some really serious stuff. And we did back off then. Like I then changed from you tell the truth all the time to you tell the truth that you want to tell now, what you feel safe in sharing with us right now. Keep to yourself what you don't feel like sharing at this time, but share this. Allows a range in this. The LSD groups, I mean, my God, the simultaneous breakthrough in consciousness, the opening that gave everyone to who were living in this stereotype cliche world, and suddenly the gates of everything open up, that will go down in history as the time of people realizing there's a lot more to subjectivity than we thought. There's even a lot more than what the religious tradition.
But is there a dark side to having people do that under minimum controls and minimum
absolutely
follow up afterward?
Absolutely. I think what we learned was that it needed to be a set and setting, and this is also what Leary and Alpert and Metzner put together in the very beginning. Even though Leary said take it all the time, they said set and setting is very important, and that's what we did here too.
Was there any?
Let me finish.
Sure.
So,
sorry.
Like with fire can be extremely dangerous, and many people are burned and devastated, destroyed by fire. But fire is also a warming element. I think our consciousness is also a warming element. And to enter into our heavens and hells takes good guidance, takes setting. And I think this is what Dick Price's project was. Michael's was exploring all the different facets of consciousness and alternative consciousness. But Dick's was, from his experience, a community of healers can heal others. Our culture is focused on a one-on-one doctor-patient relationship. We need a community therapy setting. And that's what we tried to provide here, that although we did incredible experiments, and I could tell when we take the break, an experiment setting that I think it counts for some of this, that yes, there are great dangers, and part of what I can say that I respect Nancy Lunny for is trimming away those kinds of things, and the people who were advisors to her in this, that some of the dangerous practices are trimmed away. At one time we accepted almost everything dangerous. And now we found out where we went too far, just like the French Revolution went too far.
Last question, break, and a short answer would be perfect. When you come down that hill now, what do you feel?
Well, I can feel all kinds of different things. It depends. But I still feel thrilled. I feel I'm entering into a place where I get charisma, I give charisma, and I take some vibe from it. It's like when I go on North Beach, I get vibes from that. And when I walk in Chinatown, North Beach boundary, I feel the charisma of the place. When I go into City Lights bookstore in Vesuvio's, same here. It's like my life as a high-tech nomad woven between Esalen, Berkeley, and San Francisco. When I get tired of the place, I call it a strip mine. I'm going down the hill and I'm going into the mine, bit mine. And everybody's stripped. And I wander around for 4 or 5 days, and then I go back up to the city. I can only take Esalen for 4 or 5 days.
Really?
Yeah.
Because?
Because I feel like I'm confronted with myself in a very deep way. I've got so much drama going here of all kinds. It's my village, it's my community, and it's not my culture in a way. My culture is the European culture of the bohemian artist, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I spend part of my time in Europe. And part of my time, I'm an urban personality. I need good books, I need lectures, I need drama, I need what the density of civilization is.
We're going to take a break.
Okay.
You're fast.
How are you doing with this?
I'm-
Give me your
I'm-
feedback now. How are you doing with this interview? So, Ken, how are you doing with this interview? We've been doing this, meeting each
Mhm.
other for 40 years, and we've never met at this level, and I'm just
I
touched, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm wondering how you're doing.
So, in Tibet, some of the monks have been trained to use their vocal cords as though they have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 sets of vocal cords.
Sure.
And when they chant, you have literally 4 or 5 voices coming out at the same time. So I sit here listening to you, frankly trying to open myself to learning from you. That's one voice. Another part of me is matching my recollections to yours.
Mm-hmm.
Another part of me is wanting to show proper respect to you, which I think is the master theme for me in being here, and therefore wanting this to be something you want it to be. And then a part of me is evaluating it
Mm-hmm.
every second as we go. And you're wondering how I evaluate it.
No, I'm not.
Okay, but so how am I doing? I'd say I'm doing great. I always enjoy our times bullshitting or storytelling or just, eating at the lodge and looking around, But I've been inclined to get pieces of your deal as patchwork.
Uh-huh, right.
And what I'm seeing more now is that there's an overarching architecture to kind of the whole shebang.
Right.
And I'm not even saying whether I agree or disagree with it, but I see how all the pieces sort of have a gravitational space within your architecture. And I'm finding that fantastic. Let's keep rolling. I don't want this to be about me.
Okay, yeah. No, I just wanted to add you in.
Thank
It
you.
helps us.
Thank you.
interview.
I'm very much in this. I'm in this role.
Yeah.
All right. You ready?
Yeah.
So, truth be told, you're like the rebel here. You're the rebel guy. And there have been other rebels, but they get thrown out. Nobody ever sees them again, and we can't remember their name. So, but you're a rebel that keeps coming back. So, why that role?
Well, when I was 19, I joined the International Workers of the World, the Wobblies organization. I grew up in identifying with the working class and working with early unionism in
Mhm.
where I grew up.
Mhm.
There was a lot of agitation and I identified with that, the rebel voice at an early age. I then went to San Francisco. I lived a life of contrarianism. I've always been out of the stream of anything I've been in a certain way.
You like that role? You like that place?
Well, let me say that.
Mhm.
I grew up surrounded by missionaries, Christian missionaries. I grew up surrounded by fragments of the Native American culture. I was always an outsider to that. I always looked at it as something like an anthropologist would, who's a son of an anthropologist living in all these cultures. I had that anthropological view. These are ways of life. These are positions on the spectrum of humanity that don't have any universality, actually. Indians are different than white people are, and so on. So now as I'm at Esalen, I'm in the same role. I'm surrounded by all kinds of disparate sect ideas, ideologies. Every week there's a new ideology of the 48 years I've been here. And I have my own position in this, which is a secular skeptic. I don't believe in deities or souls and things like that. I have a very clear, and I can philosophically
Yeah,
defend my position.
you said earlier that you, on your vision quest, you were praying. To who? To what?
I don't pray to anybody. I pray to my sense of a rhythm of putting myself in a trance state. Like if I go to a candomblé and Brazilian healing ceremonies, I'll enter into the singing and everything. I don't need a deity or any notion of a beyond, a transcendent domain to find value in it as like a psychological trance state that is
Got it.
a poetic frame. And yeah, I mean, these are things I've studied very deeply. What is the alternative realities? What are these? And also, being a social outsider is, well, another way to answer that, and I'll answer it quickly, is there's too much acceptance of everything here. And I feel like, in a way, I'm in a community of people who constantly say, open your mind to things, and their minds have dropped out. Their critical thinking is lost. And I feel I perform a role here at Esalen of a critical thought, like Gregory Bateson.
I don't know that anybody would say of Gregory Bateson he was a pain in the ass. But I gotta believe that there have been some people that have said that about you.
Boy, they have. Yes.
So what's the buzz for being a pain in the ass? I mean, what's the satisfaction in that?
Let me say an answer to the question. I'm protected by the ghost of Dick Price. I don't know why I'm continually here, or how they've allowed me to be here. I feel like in cultural studies we say that there are always contentions about who's going to have the narrative, master narrative. Part of my being here is about the master narrative, so in a way I can't...
Say more about that. What does that mean to you?
Well, what you just said earlier, that I'm an expression of some of the deeper values here, and I hold to them. I represent them as a model to people. Part of that role is questioning power, speaking truth to power, speaking, I think that also rests in very early initiations in the civil rights movement, being part of the Berkeley Rebellion, and learning the ideology of, let's say, modern Marxist critique, which can be really brought to bear on this place here, which is kind of a romantic frou-frou in terms of social consciousness. It's, it's barely here, in a sense that I'm talking about it, but it's here in the healing traditions, so that in a sense there are crackpot healing methods coming down the pike all the time at Esalen, and somehow Esalen gets the 20% best of that, the alternative healing methods. And so my job here is to critique the crackpots, to critique the charlatans. My part here is to challenge the power of ideologies like The Secret or something like that.
So do you ever cross comfort zones with people here when you play that role?
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Do you like crossing the comfort zones? Do you feel stimulated when you shake it up?
Absolutely. I consider myself, an adversarial, what do I call it? A chronically adversarial personality disorder.
Chronically adversarial personality disorder.
Okay, that's a term in DSM. And it fits me in a way. But in a sense, I'm an educated provocateur. I'm not someone who's just slashing and, knocking around in terms of personal narcissism. I'm speaking for a cultural tradition of critical thought. I'm speaking for a cultural tradition of, wait a minute, we, long ago when founding this place, decided that we weren't going to be authoritarian. We all read The Authoritarian Personality. We all were growing up that founded this place, suffering from authoritarianism. So part of my critique has been that I've suffered from the authoritarian models throughout the management themes here. I've let them come and go, but when they start attacking me, like it's happened recently, I will fight back with all the power I can, which is considerable. And I'm not really here to fight the management. I'm here to do my teaching. I'm here as that I feel I abandoned my children when I was a young man, and part of my life purpose has been, as I found out, teaching young people that I didn't teach my own children. I abandoned a family of 4 children when I was 24, and part of what I found being here is that I satisfy my guilt and upset about that by teaching young people how to live their lives in a better way.
So let's stay on the issue of in your view, being a truth teller and a provocateur and a defender of a particular Esalen tradition.
Uh-huh.
So how would you characterize these last 50 years in terms of your dance with management?
Oh, God. How are we going to summarize that?
Yeah. If you could put that into one sentence to start, and then we'll drill it a little further, obviously. But
well, what's David Schiffman's term for it? Something mischief, sweet mischief.
Sweet mischief.
I feel I am very much, as I say I'm Esalen's alien. I am also a lover of surrealism, of irony, and the fractured nature of identity. I mean, part of that, my dance, is to show how very different I am 5 minutes from before, or one day to the next. That there are ways that I'm a fractured personality, which was seen as pathology in my youth, and now I find it is really, it's important because we're now discovering the personality is multiple.
so when you've had friction with management,
Well, let me go back to that question. So
Yeah.
the friction of that, I feel that I engage in a lot of sweet mischief about management. I have not ever, gone on strike with management. I've never called for a strike here or something like that, which I exposed myself to in the 60s in Berkeley, San Francisco State, that all of these things, that's part of my identity as a social being. I feel like that the psychological focus in American psychology is on the individual. I'm a social psychologist. I believe that we also have to be political beings. And part of my role here at Esalen is to show what it is to be a political being in a democracy as the loyal opposition. And that's how I see my role here. I don't think I could or want to resign from being the loyal opposition.
do you ever feel that you've misbehaved? Sweet mischief is a charming way to describe behavior, but there can also be mean-spirited mischief. There can also be misguided mischief.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever feel that you've wandered in that direction, that you've done something that you've said, wow, I don't know, that was probably the wrong thing to do?
Oh, sure. With management, no.
Never.
No. I've transgressed against values of the community, sexual transgression that I feel was wrong recently, like 6 years ago, and that I feel is wrong. But in terms of malicious mischief or something like that, or creating a real stink pile of shit, no. I think recently people might think that by this latest episode.
How do you think people here today, the new generation, who are not there at 34, how do you think they look upon you? What do you think they make of you? What do you think they see your role to be?
I hope it's varied, but I hope it's also 90% of them, I think, are very happy I'm here.
Because
I represent those values. I stand for those values that come out of the 60s. I think I'm seen here in the community as the best of the 60s. And I feel that's what Esalen is too. It's the best of the 60s. I think I give inspiration to a loyal opposition that is right now, we're in a very, very, let's say, I would say, the authoritarianism that has been brought to bear on the community has caused a great polarization of the community. We're in a critical place now of I would say, there are strenuous upstairs, downstairs designs on the place. There are strenuous caste systems being applied that are not part of Esalen, I think, as I say, I see Esalen as a 500-year project. I see probably in a couple of years people are going to realize that, okay, we've got the management economically in order, but this hierarchical system is destroying the kind of little centers of initiative that the different departments had, like in Japanese factory. The Japanese factory workers are given the responsibilities, and those responsibilities are taken away from the factions that once ran Esalen. Maybe it's necessary right now, but I would like to see that this authority devolves again to more communal factions vying for the pie.
But there are members of the community who have been here for 30 years and have raised family, and this is their life home. There are other members of the community just rolled in last Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody gets equal weight in your view in deciding Esalen's future?
In a certain ideal way, yes. In a certain democratic parliamentarian view that the newest person on the block can see things that the old people can't see. In my perspective as a systems theorist, the newest person's view in that sense is relevant to the whole in terms of what can they tell us that we're not seeing. Whether that voice then translates to a vote of citizenship, I don't know. I'm very occupied with what it means to be a citizen on an island that's very similar to the problem of guest workers in Germany who immigrated from Spain and Italy and then have no citizens' rights. In a way, this grew up here, I think, because this is a family estate, that they couldn't afford to have citizens, a village, grow up here. So it's devolved to this kind of thing. It's a half-feudal system. It's also a group of people that have grown up in a democracy, a parliamentary democracy. And my role, I feel, is to try to, let's have as much democracy as we can, respecting that we're on a feudal estate.
So I'll ask you a provocative question. It's not meant to be straight, but more just to... So why is it that you're the person in that role? Why not let that role fall onto other people who are more current or who've got decades in front of them? You've held on to that role now for half a century.
Yeah. Well, I can't step back. I'm a historical figure. And I'm trying to step back, and I'm also finding that as I step back, my voice that dominated allows other people to step up, and who are like Will Schutz used to do, you know? He could have took center stage all the time, but of all the teachers here, he was the one that was able to step back and not be the narcissistic focal point, but let the new blood go.
Do you mind
so
if I ask?
I'm feeling that now. I feel like, wow, Michael Murphy's son is coming up. Matt in the kitchen is coming up. Cordell is also. There's a whole group of people who it's better off, that, as you say, maybe I should retire for a year or so. Let's see what happens.
I'm just asking. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying that you've held yourself in a position, and by definition almost, if you're the provocateur, then then you're the king baboon on that zone.
Right. And that's what I'm concerned about when I'm talking about.
Do you? So let's be fanciful for a second.
Okay.
So let's imagine, rather than being the anti-authoritarian this is what's, I'm going to speak the truth and rebel against management and hierarchy and caste and class. So let's say we put you in charge of Esalen. What would you do different? How would you make this place, how would you help this place fulfill its destiny?
Well, I would begin to teach the difference between pyramid power structure and localization and communal, like systems theory. What is that all about? I would then bring back Dick Price's son, David, and Michael Murphy's son, and form a triumvirate. I'd set this up the next 3-4 years. We're going to bring in this Adam guy who did the staff week. Brilliant genius. Brilliant. And bring him closely into the management and give him powers to help us develop this kind of deep democracy communication systems that he's developed in his place. I would like, you know, the technocratic mentalities that are here, I would think that those jobs always would in the future be held by people who were literate in our traditions, that knew the literature, had been exposed to our traditions, that right now we're being managed by a group of people who are technocratic mentalities, and the danger is they really don't know what they're organizing or managing. So, period. That's enough to say.
All right. So if you were in that role, and down the hill comes Seymour Carter, what would you do with him?
I'd bring him right in. I'd say, come on, into central headquarters. And that's what I was with Dick. While Dick was alive, I was part of the central. I was with Dick, the human resources director. I was very busy and still am, and feel myself as what they now call the human resources director here. So in the 66, 67, 68, 69, Dick and I were on walks almost every morning up in the canyon, not saying much, but once in a while dropping things, telling each other what books we're reading, and we're reading the same kinds of things like Horney's Tyranny of the Shoulds. Carl Rogers were learning about Reich and doing it, working with each other constantly. That I was with the founding, as you say, I am part of the founding DNA here in the sense that I've been both central in terms of guiding this place and also off-center, which has been true since Dick's death, which is 85. I think they're crazy to marginalize me like they're doing.
What is being lost by marginalizing you?
Well, first of all, I'm one of the most skilled teachers here, and they're denying the community of my teaching, and this is drawn a protest by the community of people, and I'll show you later this letter that's written, a beautiful letter about my contribution, and signed by over 70 people. They're being denied the best teacher on the place for some silly, pissing contest.
Do you mind if I play the devil's advocate for a second?
Go ahead.
In your own tapestry, there's kindness, there's thoughtfulness, there's wisdom, there's also meanness from time to time. You do have a strength to you that can somehow maim.
Right.
Not often, and I think as you've matured, it's less of you.
Right.
But it's still, maybe that's your Synanon history. Do you feel any responsibility for having injured or wounded or maimed any of the managers here with your dissatisfaction with them?
No.
None at all?
No. I'll answer it this way. I feel that I've been subject to bullying, bureaucratic bullying by them, starting with 7 years ago when I was suspended for smoking a joint in a New Year's Eve party. And the suspension came about because of an unsigned poison letter And I feel like that shocked me so much, so put me so back. And later I had a heart attack. I was in poverty. I was in very bad condition. And no one ever apologized to me for that. That I really was driven into, which now I still, 5 years later, living in my car, that no one has apologized to me for the marginalization, for the stamping on my fingers every time I get a little bit of a leg up. I feel they deserved my scorching diatribe. And in another era, it would have been a dueling matter. My honor was hurt deeply by them trumping up charges. They might have had an acceptance of me if they had brought up some of this, what we talked about, like the sexual, but they tried to do it on a completely innocent breach of mine and trumped up charges and so on. And I feel like they slapped me very hard in a way that was completely out of line. And so they say I've damaged Esalen with the email that got out on Facebook. I say I wasn't damaging Esalen, I was protecting Esalen. I'm fighting for Esalen against an overuse of power. And I was insulting them, not Esalen.
Okay. Question.
Yeah.
Are you okay with me?
Yeah, this is good.
Getting under the skin a little bit?
Into the fire here.
Okay, we don't, and it's not the whole,
And I really
it's a
don't
piece
wanna-
of the, we don't want to spend the
a
whole,
lot of
right,
time.
I got it. But let me ask you, so we're going to back away, I've got other questions I want to get to.
Yeah.
You've mentioned several times that you believe yourself to be a historical figure.
Yeah.
And so, and I believe you are. Legendary. But I've also been to Williamsburg, Virginia, which is a historical town, and the people dress up there like it's the 18th century, and they shoe horses, and they wear hats like they did, and then they go home and put on their normal clothes and drive home in their Ford vans and so on. So it's an acting as though I'm a historical figure, but it's just sort of a Disney-esque thing. How much of being a historical figure in your spirit is about showing up and representing the 60s versus being anchored in the 60s but still being a present, current force today?
I don't think there's any distinction. I mean, I feel like the values I am promoting are not hippie values. They're Grecian values. They're deep values in our culture of, really intense endeavors of sustained intelligence focused on something, to explore some part of the world, some facet of how the world goes together. And I feel that that's what my values are, in essence. And the costumes that I wear is, I love to wear costumes, and I love that, I mean, in a sense, I can dress up or down. I live in Europe part of my life. Part of my life is living in a middle-class world of the urban culture. I can dance on several different sets. I'm not just limited to speaking hippie. I speak fluent German. I teach philosophy and psychotherapy in German. And I feel like the weave of myself is...
Can I hear your German accent? I've never
Ich
heard
kann
you.
Deutsch. Was willst du von mir, Kenny? Was willst du hören?
I was with one of our German-speaking team members about a month ago, who told me that when you speak German, it's a gentle, thoughtful choice of words. That there's a Seymour in German that she thought was quite captivating.
Yeah. That's true. I'm a different person in German language. And I am more thoughtful, more reflective. But that's not a new part of me to me. I'm also... Remember, I've been studying Charlotte Seller's work for more than...
I'm going to get to Charlotte and your teachers, and after this one question, then we'll be there. So, historical figures. Sometimes history looks at figures. You, me, Danny B., I don't know, whoever else we might think, or other outside of Esalen. and reflects on them and say that was a triumphant arc.
Uh-huh.
Other times people say a historical figure, tragic arc.
Yeah.
What's your mix?
Oh, a heroic arc, sure, for sure. For sure. I mean, I'm finishing out now. This is my 70th year on skis. My parents put me on skis when I was 3 years old. I've skied 7 days this year. I fell once, going full out. I feel like this marvelous recovery from my heart attack and that's another story, another interview, like I felt my life was over 6 years ago after that heart attack. And I was very angry about being rescued from what I thought was a good death.
You were by the side of the road. I know Ronnie found you.
Yeah, I don't want to tell this story right now because I do want to take a break now and come back at 2.
We have about, if we can go 5 or 6 more minutes.
Yeah, we can go 5 or 6 more minutes.
Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of memory lane with you.
Okay, well, let me answer this question.
Okay.
Say the question again.
Well, the question was your historic
Arc
figure.
Yeah,
Is the arc an arc? He was a historic figure. What a tragedy. A historic figure. What a triumph. And you came back that it was a heroic. Was your choice of words?
Yeah, a triumph.
And then you slid to the side and were using your example as an active skier.
Yeah.
But do you believe your life and your role as a provocateur and your role as the resident alien and as a psychotherapist and philosopher and adventurer of the human experience, how much of it is tragedy, how much of it is triumph?
Oh my God. Well, do we have 8 hours?
Just give me a...
how could I mean, I can't really, I mean, that's such a deep question to answer. Of course, I've had tragedy and triumph throughout my life
Which way do you think it will ultimately tip at the end of your days? Which way will it...
I do not
Where do you
know.
think you are if you were to add it up now? More in the triumph category or tragedy?
For sure. I mean, I've had a rich life, a life that's been like 6 men's lives. And I feel like, my God, when I had that heart attack, I felt very clearly I could go any time. It really doesn't matter. I'm not resistant to dying. And that reflected back to the many acid trips, the LSD experiences in probably this room with Dick and Chris of going in deep to our death, life-death phases that happen very rapidly in LSD experience. So that when I was faced with my real death, I felt like a skier who'd been there before. I just was quite comfortable with it. So now I am now rebinding. I don't want to die right now. I'm having a good time. But there are also anguishes. There are periods that are dark shadows in my life. My relationship with my children is not good. My grandchildren is not good. I have 8 to 13 great-grandchildren that I don't know at all. So there's a lot of sadness. I have a brother who committed a murder early in his life and is living in a self-imposed hermitage. My family story is trailer trash tragedy, murder, conspiracy to murder, drug tragedy, poverty, prostitution, just really horrid shit.
And on the triumph side, what would you say is it your resilience? Is it your intelligence? Is it your joie de vivre? What is it about you that keeps lifting you up?
I don't know. I always find a resilience. I always find, I've thrown myself into the ordeal in life and been found by fate in really up against the wall things. And it's a combination of resilience and I find ways, I'm very clever, I find ways out of really tight spots throughout my life. And there could be more films about that, like the time I walked on fire and then ended up 4 days later after a megalomaniacal breakthrough of walking on fire in a padded cell 3 days later in San Francisco jail. That's another story. But I would say it's resilience, that I was born with. I'm a mixture of Swedish, German, French, Irish, and Indian, Native American. I have a very, very powerful, physical, strong physique. My cousins are all that way too. We're incredibly physically strong.
I'm going to ask you one last question before this break.
Yeah.
You have another question in you? You okay? Let's take a breath here. So you are a teacher. You're teaching me. You've taught many people over the years. Who was your most important teacher here at Esalen? Who were your two most important teachers?
I would like to refer to a teacher I had at 14 and then at Esalen.
Okay.
I think at 14 I was heading in the direction of delinquency, moving out of an intellectual life. And at 14 I was taken into a special class in my junior high and was taught by Jerry Namey, who was a Christian Lebanese, who taught, and I just caught fire with his examination of my mind. He taught psychology and sociology. And so at 14 my mind was put on fire by what is the literature of personality, where I could read it. I'm an autodidact. It's very hard to decide between several teachers, and as someone who's has to resist the essentialist nature of your questions.
Several is okay.
So, in a sense, I would say what comes right now as you ask is Will Schutz first.
Really?
And I would say because of all these teachers that I had that were prominent pioneers, exemplars of a tradition, Will Schutz taught a tradition, and his tradition was, of all the teachers at Esalen who were so fucking high profile and elbowing everyone else out, he could step back and let his students shine. And that's what he did. He prepared us. He gave us a setting to take on responsibility.
It's true.
And we did it.
Did that with me.
And I thought, wow, fucking A.
Who else? And who else?
And I would say, next comes Fritz Charlotte. Fritz/Charlotte. Fritz.
On par in your mind? Very different people.
On par, and that is my tradition. That's what I'm teaching now, is the continuation of what I learned from Fritz, the condition of the principles of Charlotte Seller's work on the other hand. So my left hand is Gestalt, emotional work. My right hand is sensory awareness and presence. The link is presence, being present in the here and now. Those teachings are how to be present is a lifelong study, as the Buddhists know. Then the major teaching is Dick and I, unpacking the Buddhist tradition in our walks together, in our meditation, in our talks. How do we link Buddhism, the Theravadan, the body-mind, the body schools, the Zen schools, the Soto Zen schools, to our traditions here? What will that be? What will it look like? So I would say, Jerry Namey, Will, Fritz Charlotte, and Dick, if I had to choose 5. And the Buddhist tradition.
Can I slide one more question in before our break?
Yeah.
Many of the examples you've given, and who might be the leadership council here, teachers that have influenced you, people you've been drawn to, have been men. Your story tips more towards men than towards women. Do you think could that be said of Esalen in terms of its leadership and its power, or is that more the way you hold it?
Well, I have to, these 5-minute questions that need to be an hour. Feminism its impact on me was astonishing. That I'm an intellect that looks at ideologies and the impact of feminism on my life and on the life of males in our culture who took it up. I feel, have you read Don Johnson's books?
Protean Body?
and others of his books, he talks about how the women, the position of the feminists attacking and challenging the patriarchal position is something I'm deeply aware of. One of my major teachers was Charlotte. The one I studied most with was Charlotte. As a child, I played with the girls as well as the boys. I feel myself to be ambisexual, not gendered in that way. My mind is feminine as much as masculine. The question of is there a predominance at Esalen of male figures in the 50-year look? No, I don't think so. I think the community here has been very, very majorly impacted by the feminist perspective, and of course Nancy's been in charge for a long time. I don't agree with her, Fifth Avenue chamber music gestalt so much, but there's a feminist view there, and the feminism came here in the 70s and upended everybody's apple cart. And I could tell a story. I'm remembering it a night. Let me put you here, Danny, so I can tell the story. So one night, John Hyder and I had a group marriage with Ann Hyder and my wife Betsy at that time. And we were set up by Dick Price to have the Pfeiffer Beach house. And we had this beautiful farmhouse. Dick and I were coming here. We were all coming here working. Every day we'd go home. The girls would cook the meal, wash up, and John and I would smoke pot and talk philosophy after the dinner table. The women, we had a big kitchen, and the women were there cooking at it, and we were so happy with this thing. And one night, we're sitting there after dinner, and Nancy and Betsy and Ann started throwing plates on the floor. And they cleared the fucking shelves with busting plates. We're not doing this anymore. We're not doing this for you anymore. From now on, you cook. From now on, you wash up. This is the end of it for you guys. John and I are going like this. What? What do you mean this is the end for us? And it was the end. And in that way, we segue into maybe putting a period on this interview for now.
Let's do that. Thank you. And thank you, Danny. And we're going to go grab some, share one reflection, and then ask you some more questions. And I realize this can be tiring, so we'll do only as far as you're comfortable. So the reflection I want to share with you is one of my favorite science fiction stories. And I won't get the name of it right, but hopefully I'll get the essence of the story, is a story where it's way in the future, and they create a time machine which they make available for recreation. And the way it works is you can pay a certain amount of money, and you and other people can go back to some ancient time in history. But the rule of it is you can't touch anything, because then you might impact something which, going forward and back to the present, could alter things. So people take a trip back, and this one adventurer is so fascinated he walks away from the device and by accident steps on a butterfly and kills it. Doesn't tell anybody because doesn't want to, get fined or anything. And then gets back in the time chip, and they move back to the present, and they get to the present, they open the door, and the future is exactly as it was before they left, except there's no color. By having killed that butterfly a billion years earlier, it removed the whole evolution of color. And I believe...
Let me digest that image for a second. Okay, go on.
So I believe that if you were to remove Seymour Carter from Esalen's history, some important part of the fabric would not be here. And it's in everything. It's part of the genetic ingredient. It's in the way the trees are shaped. It's in the way people talk. It's in the way people dress. It's in the way people think and feel and function, and the way Esalen is identified. That you are a piece of that grown forward in time. And while it would probably be too much for me to handle if you were the predominant genetic code. But to remove Seymour from Esalen is to somehow, in meaningful ways, diminish Esalen. Mm-hmm. So I want you to know that and Esalen to me is the most wonderful of wonderful places. And even if I don't come here, the thought of it, the culture, the nature, its purpose, whether it fulfills it or not, trying to fulfill it keeps me alive and sane and helps me fulfill my destiny. So I want to thank you for contributing the you to this place, which has allowed me to be me. Does that make any sense at all?
I love it. I mean, that's what I think, that if I say what I feel my major companions here have been a couple of girlfriends, and Dick and John Hyder, Dick Price and John Hyder, Chris Price. Mm-hmm. But I think that's what we feel we're up to, although we didn't know we were getting there, but shortly after helicopters landing on the lawn and things like that, you start to get a sense that, and luckily that's one of the things that I want to feel that I've done to people, is give them a sense of the promise of themselves, the tools to open up themselves to, like, what? Have you seen the new Red Book that's published by Jung?
I've heard about it.
Oh yeah, well, it's published, and I'm not a Jungian or a Freudian because I don't believe in foundations, but I do think that Jung opened up a sense, especially with his creative unconscious, and whether there's a archetypical unconscious or not, the point was that he gave us the tools of the creative unconscious, and we learned here at Esalen the tools that, like a snap of a finger, you're there in some domain of the creative unconscious. So that's what I think we're building on Freudian ideas of the multiples that are in us, the protean multiples. And that's, I started off thinking that, and that was in the literature too, there somehow under the civilized, under the local, under the personal was an essential kernel of the self, that if you found that, you would be yourself. I don't believe in that. I believe we're mutually contending scripts that are often in contradiction and compromise forms or inner conflicts that are immense. There's no such thing as a unified self. In the sense there's a unified self in Gestalt theory, and when a need is met, and that, like taking a breath or drinking a glass of water or taking a piss, when we need to, there's some sense that that's fulfillment. But then the next moment we're off balance with something that needs to be attended to, and it's like this. There's this cycle of minuses appearing, a response from the self comes and gives a plus to that minus, and then there's another homeostatic equilibrium that needs to be established.
All right, because we only have a little while, and we've got a lot of very complex and fascinating reflections, I'm going to drill through a number of things quickly.
Okay.
And I understand and respect that for you, simple answers or one words, there's something wrong about that idea. But I'm still going to try to drill through a lot of things quickly.
Okay.
So we're going to wander through the decades, and I want you just to riff 30 seconds or less, or a minute. What pops into your mind here at Esalen from the 60s?
Long hair, warm-heartedness, the baths, the pool and the ocean, Danny B. I don't think you've been there that long. But Danny's a stalwart. There's some...
Stay with it. So just a couple of riff words. 70s. Put me into the 70s. What goes on? What do you recall from the 70s? What words come to your mind?
I left here, I felt Esalen collapsed at that time. I felt it was into a kind of a decline. Fritz had left in 71 or so and died shortly afterwards. We didn't have a dominating paradigm, and into that rushed a bunch of charlatans and a bunch of...
Like?
I can't remember names, but, and I really shouldn't name any names, but anyway, then I got discouraged with Esalen. I think Julian Silverman came in. I felt like I'd been exposed to incredible revolutionary times for 10 years. I needed to back away and began to consider going to Europe as a quieter place to digest what I was.
So the 70s, give me some words, Esalen for the 70s.
I was, see, the thing is, I lived in Germany from 73 to 83, pretty much.
Right.
I came back after 5 years in Europe.
So let's hop to the
then we go to the
80s. What words come to your mind? Esalen in the 80s.
Well, let me go back to the 70s now, because that was the time when Dick, Chris, I, Drucker, and Hector and Sharon did the Ralph Monster, where I think we took our expertise most deeply in our work, combining LSD, 3-day marathons in this room. I think we're in this, or the next unit. And we would start Friday night dropping acid, and then going through until Sunday, every 6 hours dropping more acid, and going through our horrors, our heavens. And we learned at that time, when someone got stuck in a fear state, they were stopping breathing, and they were also locking up their diaphragm, locking up their body, so there was no movement. So we already had been fooling around with LSD for 6 or 8 years, but we discovered we'd learned Rolfing and massage and Gestalt, so we learned how to work ourselves through it. So let's imagine someone like you are taking acid and you're going into the fear state, and we are seeing you go into the fear state.
And you're also on acid.
We're also on acid. We're dropping 1,000 mics every 8 hours or something like that, or whatever it was to carry us through. So we would see this fear state immediately, and we would cluster around you, begin to cuddle you, and have you work through it, talk to the empty, talk to your fear state. Then we would massage, get you in touch with your body, and begin to mold your energy and move your energy through the fear state, first going into it, not avoiding anything that comes. And we'd learn the security of that. Just go into, okay, you're dying, go ahead and die. What happens next? And the person goes into, oh God, I'm choking, I can't breathe. Can you really take a breath? Because the fear state is stabilized by the fear of taking a deep breath. And we learned if they would be coached through the taking of the deep breath and a bit of massage and so on, they would then break through to another level. The energy would come through to face the fear. The fight or flight response actually was a mobilization that we had to provide some target.
Was mobilizing or immobilizing?
It was immobilizing because they were unable to enter into the excitement state.
Right, gotcha.
So we got them into, kicking, screaming, all of that.
So that was, those sessions, that group, we called it the Ralph Monster?
Yeah.
Was a highlight for you?
Yeah. Of the late 60s, 70s, I think we did it a couple of years. And it got so intense after a couple of years, I thought, I can't do this anymore. It's just like too much of all of me comes out. And that was about the time I began to feel I've got to get out of here. I've been in a revolution every day since 62 to 72. I've had to change my beliefs every day because of new things coming down the pipe.
Sure.
And I thought, fuck man, I'm falling apart from too much information.
So you went to Europe.
And then I went to Europe, and it took me 5 years to kind of recover there.
Take me to the 80s now. What comes to your mind? Just some words. 80s, Esalen, you.
Esalen, me. I came back. Dick and I picked up our relationship and began hiking a lot. I remember hiking a lot with Dick and being really pleased to be back. And we would hike 2 and 3 days in a row, or 2 or 3 days a week, up in the canyon. Starting 6 in the morning, we'd go up there, and if I wanted to work, he'd work with me, or he'd want to work and work with it. It was quite a lot of silence, or working and sitting. And the 80s is Dick's death, of course, 85, that he was killed by a falling rock, which that falling rock, his death, shattered the equilibrium in a way that we're still recovering from.
We're going to come back to Dick. 90s, what were the 90s for you? Esalen.
Esalen, let me think for a minute. Well, this this runs into my love affair with Claire, late 80s, and my life was spent between London, Germany, and here, and part of it was with a very passionate affair that was completely catastrophic every week, and I was devastated emotionally. I moved to Berlin, lived in Berlin in 92, something like that. That was the time when something happened here that I wasn't a party to. The baths were closed. I think it was. The baths got wiped out. But see, some of the times of the 70s I feel I didn't participate in, so don't know very much about. Overarching is Dick and Chris's commitment to establishing their form of reflective meditation, Gestalt. And when I came back in 83, I felt, boy, it's really established here. Everybody knows the code. Everybody is on the trip. Everyone is like understanding the worth.
And then Dick
of this.
died.
And then Dick died.
And did the 90s hold any, was that a decade? And then we'll get to the last decade we've just come out of.
90s. Where are we now?
2010, so we're...
So, okay, if I go back 6 years to my heart attack...
Before then would be
before
the 90s.
before the 90s. It's escaping me, the 90s.
How about
right
the
now.
last decade? So then these last 10 years. So
It's
since
been a real struggle. I feel I've been marginalized. I've marginalized myself. I've struggled with poverty a lot. I lived in a canyon for a couple of years in a tent. No one knows. I'm just now telling. And I've lived in my car for 3 years. So the 90s. And what it was a disaster at first, having to live in the canyon. But instead, it turned me healthy. I just loved being back there in the fresh air at night, and then in the morning, this air comes rushing down the canyon. It's cool, crisp, perfumed with all the scent of the mountains. And I started to just revive, laying on the earth next to the creek. There's a lot of me throughout this time, this 50 years at Esalen. It's very, very much like a root in the ground. The earth, the canyon, the baths, the sea, the elemental aspects of Esalen are incredibly important to me. We haven't really said much about that.
No, I have a question on that.
And to Dick, Both of us were really deeply attuned and deeply contacting the environment here in the canyon a lot.
If there were one spot on this property that is just your favorite, I know it's hard to pick one because there's probably 50, but if there were one spot, what would that spot be?
It's the ledge out here on the over the fence where there's a ledge that I often sit there. I often work there with people. I had a lot of sex there.